Speaking of which, I think we talk about technology. I personally work in tech. I love playing with AI. Sherlock is also having these AI algorithms to optimize training and being able to follow up with Gen Z and being able to scale as an app inside any corporation, including mid-sized to enterprise companies as well. So we would love to follow up with a question related to app-based employer offers. First of all, that's the first part. So things like wellness apps like Lyra, Modern Health, Headspace, which recently acquired Ginger, as well as Curial, Spring Health on the market today. What are your thoughts on these apps, their approach, effectiveness, even measurements?
Yeah. Great question. I'm so glad we're touching upon this because I think it's really important for us to recognize that these companies that you just mentioned, that is B2P companies, that is now making mental health resources more readily available to their employees. It's a very important shift. These companies were in development and even offering their services before COVID. But there's no question in my mind, COVID really accelerated. Really, companies really recognizing the importance of mental health during COVID and really, committing their resources to make these app-based, most of them app-based mental health services available. What's also really noteworthy is that some of them offer only psychotherapy, but others offer, like Lyra, offers coaching. So depending on who you are, what you identify as your present concern, and the intensity and the level of concerns, you will be directed to different type of coaching, or excuse me, different type of resource. So I think that's really important. So I would say some of the benefits for these companies that are bringing to professionals are just ready access. Maybe you and maybe some of the audience. Because I used to work full time as a clinician, I know this from my former clients' account. Finding a therapist is really hard, especially hard right now. There's a barrier by their availability, B, geography, expertise, or even finding someone that matches identity or other factors that are important to you. It's been difficult. And of course, getting to therapy in itself, transportation wise, and finding time, it has always been, there's so many barriers that used to prevent people who are interested in getting mental health support not be able to do it. So I think what these companies, the ones that you mentioned, have made it possible is for the professionals to be able to have really a very much wider range of access by going on their phone and requesting support by going through their sort of an intake process. So I think that's really important. I think they also, a lot of these app-based mental health companies often give their users an ability to identify like a identity or background or even type of service or psychotherapy that they prefer, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or psychodynamic therapy, couples counseling, family counseling. These are things by which you could filter your potential clinician or coach. I think that's another added benefit because we do know that young professionals having come of age through times of having, as a country, having talked about social inequalities and their identities as they interface, they are a lot more interested in finding someone with whom they could connect in a meaningful way around their identity. So would say those are all the important contributions. I think some areas that we don't really know quite well because it's not necessarily a statistic that is widely available is say what percentage of professionals that have access to one of these app-based mentors use it. I think what I read is that percentage is not as high as a company would like. So I think it brings back to your question of how can we, it's great to offer these services, but how can we actually maximize and optimize? And I think it comes back to what we already talked about, and that is around communication from managers or HRs to really help professionals know the benefits. Some of them might be around having conversation about someone who's already used that resource and to say, what's really helpful for me as I was going through X, Y, and Z. That's one thing that I've been thinking about to say, how can we really, once the resource is available, how can we make it more accessible because there are still people for whom using mental health resource may be a little bit uncomfortable just because they haven't used it before or their family has not necessarily see that as a viable mental health option, a resource option. Next question I have is really most of these apps are really designed to be a short-term treatment, so to speak, short-term support. So I think one of the questions that I wonder about is what do people do after they had a set number of sessions with this providers through support like this, probably depending on their kind of acuity and severity of their challenges. Um, I wonder what happens at the end of that time of using app-based support. Where do they get referred to? People in the community. What happens if they can't find someone? Is there flexibility built into the service so that they could continue and extend their utilization and usage? Those are some questions we don't know. And then lastly, what you said is how effective are they? To my knowledge, there has not been a study that compared this type of service to traditional psychotherapy. There might be out there. I haven't come across one yet. We do know that actually virtual care is effective in a certain population and for certain type of wellness related topics. Comparing sort of the traditional versus app-based support, I think that's something that we should continue to look at and to see, again, it's not one or the other, it's really how can they complement and really optimize the support for our employees.
Absolutely. It's so interesting that you open my eyes to thinking about these apps more holistically. I agree that I look back years ago, whenever there's a new program, new app, it helped tremendously for us to be creating a little pod, little cohort of people who are using and learning it together. And also, secondly, not to assume that we simply know how to use it or how it applies to us. No matter how simple a program is, I also come from like a design and UX background, working as a producer, I realized that we cannot make assumptions that people immediately know what it is, how it works, and having training available. And these days, having virtual walkthroughs, having video tutorials that people prefer to consume offline, or having these live sessions. You have to create these sessions, different formats of learning for people to adapt to their own level of comfort and their own convenience. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you find it helpful. We'll soon be back with our next podcast. In the meantime, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues.